That night, someone gave me a hard jab in the side. I instantly leapt up and grabbed for my rifle. "Wipe the sleep from your eyes," Sidorov said with amusement. "Huh? What, are the Germans coming?" "No, they're sleeping, but we've been ordered to fall back." "What, are you crazy? We just thrashed the Germans." "Well, the devil will sort things out. The guys are saying we've been outflanked." At dawn, we took up new positions in the area of the village of Begunitsi. All day we fortified our positions, dug trenches, mined the approaches to them, and patrolled the surrounding terrain. That evening I was standing in the trench next to the battalion commander's dugout, where I had arrived together with my company commander and was waiting for the conference to end. Just then a rocket flew into the sky, then a second and a third one. Light and heavy machine guns began to sputter, and short bursts of automatic weapon fire and rifle shots were audible. Our quiet day was over. Senior Lieutenant Kruglov stepped out of the bunker together with Major Chistyakov. The battalion commander paced back and forth in the narrow trench several times. "Victor," the battalion commander finally said in a tone I had never heard from him before, "I'm entrusting you with a matter which could decide the fate of all of us. The Germans are planning something. They're reshuffling their forces. Where do they want to land the main blow? That's what we must find out. Do you understand? It is essential. Perhaps, in this headquarters, you'll find some documents." The major against paced off along the trench. He was nervous, and when he walked up to Kruglov, he looked at him fixedly in the eyes and said, "You yourself know that this is very dangerous business. Watch out and take care." Chistyakov tightly embraced Kruglov and kissed him 3 times on the cheeks. Overhearing the conversation between the commanders, I also became worried. To get behind enemy lines was not a particularly difficult task, but to return again when the front was always changing. That was a very complicated matter. Parting from the battalion commander, a happy and keen Kruglov walked over to me and asked, "So, are you tired of waiting?" "Never mind. Anything can happen at the front. Let's head home now, for we have a lot to do today." These words had been uttered so naturally that it seemed we really were going to head home along the brightly lit streets of Leningrad. But the rockets and the chattering of the machine guns reminded me of the hard reality. Entering his dugout, Kruglov took a seat on the edge of a plank bed, pulled a notepad from his map case, tore off a clean sheet, and began to write something. Politruk Vasilev was sitting next to the telephone set and transmitting a daily report. Kruglov quickly stood up and handed the sheet to the sergeant major, telling him, "Quickly bring these people to me, check their weapon and ammunition, and draw 2 days of rations for each." "What's happened? Where are you sending these men and why?" asked Vasilev. "Major Chistyakov has given us an assignment to make our way into the enemy rear." Vasilev softly whistled. Kruglov spread out a map on his knees and pointed to a small red square that had been drawn on it. "According to aerial reconnaissance, the headquarters of a German unit is located in this area. We need to find it and obtain some documents. I think that the Germans, intoxicated with their successes, won't be very alert." "How many men are going?" "I'll be taking along 18 men." "How many kilometers to the enemy headquarters?" "As the crow flies, 6 kilometers, but 9 to 10 kilometers indirectly. We have 8 hours to carry out this assignment, and not a minute more." Sergeant Major Rozov entered the dugout and reported, "Comrade Commander, I've assembled the men. What are your orders?" Kruglov folded the map and stuck it into his case. We stepped out into the trench. The company commander greeted the soldiers and then clearly and succinctly laid out the plan for the upcoming operation. "Comrade Senior Lieutenant, just how are we going to slip through the German line?" the soldier Ushakov asked Kruglov. "There is still no continuous front line here. We'll infiltrate the enemy's forward units through the swamp." There were no other questions. We turned over our personal documents to Vasilev, donned some captured camouflage uniforms, and checked our weapons. A short time later, we were moving towards the swamp. A group of 3 led the way. Senior Lieutenant Kruglov, Sidorov and I. Sidorov spoke up as we entered it. At least the drought this year is worth something. Any other summer, there's no way through this swamp. We advanced about 2 kilometers into the swamp before emerging in a dense forest of mixed woods. In the woods, everything was deeply slumbering. There was not a single sound. Even the birds, frightened by the sounds of the day's fighting, were silent. Kruglov led us onto a forest footpath and ordered Sidorov and me to go on ahead while he waited on the path for the other men. We moved very cautiously, advancing from tree to tree and maintaining a constant line of sight to those following us. We followed the path to a ravine in the woods, where we stopped to examine its slopes and bottom. We didn't detect anyone's presence. We advanced another kilometer, perhaps a bit more. Everything was quiet. Suddenly we could hear unintelligible voices ahead of us. The company commander ordered everyone off the path quickly and to lie down, while he took several paces further along the path, fell prone on some grass, and pressed his ear to the ground. Then he sprang up, wiped his face with a kerchief, and said, "People are coming this way." Kruglov quickly took cover behind a birch tree, never taking his eyes off the path ahead. The sounds of approaching people grew. We could clearly hear someone stumble over an exposed root and softly swear. Sidorov whispered in my ear, "I don't understand how Germans could make their way to this place. After all, they fear the forest like the devil's lair, not only at night, but in the daytime as well. This is the front. You can expect anything." Still, this is strange. We fell silent. Kruglov suddenly appeared bestiose. "Let everyone moving down this path pass," he quickly said. "If the opportunity presents itself, silently grab the one bringing up the rear, drag him behind this fir tree, and wait for me." I dropped down into the grass and shifted a little closer to Sidorov. The silhouettes of people became clearly outlined on the path. The first soldier passed us with a rifle in his hands, then a second and a third. We counted 30 of them as they moved past us before we quit counting. The men were moving slowly, breathing heavily, tripping over tree roots, and some even fell. "Look at how they're falling all over themselves," Sidorov whispered to me. Several more German soldiers passed by us. They were lagging significantly behind the main group. 2 of them, bringing up the rear, were moving cautiously, their heads swiveling from side to side. "Let's take these 2, I alerted Sidorov. "I'll grab the first, you seize the second. Only do it carefully. Don't kill him. We need a tong. Red Army slang for a talking prisoner." The soldiers approached to within 5 paces of use, and just as the one in front ducked under an overhanging branch of the fir tree, I struck him on the knee with the butt of my submachine gun. He dropped his rifle and fell face first to the ground. I pounced on him, and quickly rolling him over, I shoved a gag in his mouth, grabbed him by the arms, and hauled him off the path. Sidorov dealt with the second one in the same way. Leaving my comrade to guard the prisoners, I went over to the fir tree, where we had agreed to meet Kruglov. Everything was quiet all around. It seemed as if life itself had died out in the woods. I stood waiting for several minutes. Something cracked behind me. Turning quickly, I spotted the senior lieutenant. Approaching me, he stooped and picked up a forage cap from the ground. "We've captured tongues. We've grabbed 2 of them," I reported. "Whose forage cap is this?" "I don't know, Comrade Commander." "Well, we'll try to find out." We stopped and listened. The woods were silent, dark, and chilly. I led Kruglov to the heath thicket where Sidorov was guarding the prisoners. The commander dropped to his knees, looked the soldiers over carefully, and then pulled the gag out of the mouth of one of them. "Who are you?" he asked. "What's it to you?" the prisoner replied in fluent Russian language. "Kruglov ordered us to untie the prisoners and to give them water." "Our conversation's going to be brief. Where were you going?" Kruglov asked sternly. "Home." "What, have you had enough of fighting?" "Maybe." "And what's in that bag?" "Gifts for the wife." With a deft motion, Sidorov opened the bag, pulled a gun sight from it and handed it over to the commander. Kruglov closely examined the artillery device. "This is a fine gift for the wife." "Such as it is. Put this little gift back in the bag for him and let him lug it in health. But bring him along," Kruglov said abruptly, before stepping back out onto the forest path. Later I learned that we had taken prisoner cadets from a Leningrad military specialist school who were escaping enemy encirclement. When our comrades on the mission came up, Senior Lieutenant Kruglov stretched out on the grass with platoon commander Vladimirov, and they began to scrutinize a field map under the light of a torch. We gathered around them in order to shield the glow of the light. "You see this area, encircled by red pencil?" Kruglov asked, looking up. We all leaned over for a look at the map. "Today our pilots discovered some sort of headquarters here. Tonight, possibly, the Germans will change its location." The Red Army soldiers were silent. Kruglov checked his compass. "If I'm not mistaken, there should soon be a clearing with 5 large oak trees." Just as at the beginning of our march, Kruglov, Sidorov and I took the lead of the column. The forest began to grow sparse. Against the backdrop of the night sky, 5 spreading tree canopies appeared. "There are the trees," Kruglov quietly said. "Somewhere around here there should be the headquarters." With that, he ordered us to scout the clearing and locate the headquarters. We fanned out and started crawling across the clearing towards the highway. Sidorov was next to me. Our uniforms quickly became soaked with dew, but it was easy to slip through the wet grass. Sidorov crawled ahead of me. Suddenly he stopped and sniffed the air. "Do you smell tobacco smoke?" "No, what of it?" "Someone nearby is smoking." The tall, lush grass interfered with the view of whatever might be ahead. As soon as I raised my head above the grass, I saw the dark silhouettes of vehicles next to a ravine, around which men were scurrying back and forth. "Well, what?" Sidorov whispered to me. "Vehicles. Let's crawl closer." Approaching about another 50 meters, we saw one man working on an engine under a raised hood, and another lying on his back underneath the vehicle, doing something with a wrench. A group of soldiers were lying on the grass not far from them, conversing and smoking heavily. We observed the Germans for several minutes, and then began stealthily crawling back. When we reached the designated spot for reassembly, everyone else was already there. Ulyanov reported to the company commander that several armoured cars equipped with antennas had been detected on the side of the highway. Sentries were guarding the armoured cars, and a patrol was moving along the highway. We also briefly reported on the results of our reconnaissance. Kruglov and Vladimirov began to discuss a plan of attack. Getting worked up as he spoke, Vladimirov argued that it would be best to launch an immediate attack on the Germans. The company commander grabbed him by the arm and, speaking quite deliberately, asked, "Yet what if this is a field repair shop, not a headquarters? At night it is easy to make mistakes. If we attack, we will disclose ourselves." Kruglov then rose to his feet and relayed his decision. "Your plan is risky. We might end up only getting men killed. Take your men around the clearing to the road on the other side. Wait for us there." Kruglov took Sidorov and me along with him. The grey ribbon of road passed through the meadow and disappeared into the forest. The silhouettes of sentries appeared on the road. We let them pass and then quickly slipped into a roadside ditch. There we encountered telephone lines. "Excellent," whispered Kruglov. "We'll follow them to the headquarters. If that's our objective, we'll take a look." Sidorov pressed my head towards a line. "Lay your ear on it, maybe you'll hear Hitler." I swore softly and elbowed Sidorov strongly in the side. We cautiously made our way along the lines, to a point where they left the ditch and climbed a tree. We crawled another 15 meters or so. It was impossible to follow the lines any further. A patrol appeared on the road. The Germans were conversing as they moved slowly along the side of the highway. We crawled out of the ditch, concealed ourselves in the tall grass, and began to observe the sentries' every movement. There were 2 of them. "Oh, it's a shame Peter Romanov isn't here with us," I thought. "He could have had a heart-to-heart talk with them. The Germans passed our position, heading towards the woods, but soon came back moving in the opposite direction. At Kruglov's signal, we slithered down into the ditch and crawled after the sentries. We soon again found the telephone lines, which were running from a short post to a vehicle. It was some sort of armoured van. Now and then soldiers were entering it. 2 sentries were guarding the entry, holding machine pistols at the ready. A little further down the road, we noticed 2 more armoured cars, also guarded by sentries, but no one was approaching these vehicles. We lay there in silence for several minutes. Then Kruglov touched my shoulder and said in a whisper, "Keep watch. I'll soon return and tell you what to do." With that, he disappeared into the darkness, slithering quietly on his belly. The minutes stretched on agonizingly. Sidorov lay gloomily, now and then wiping his forehead with his forage cap, even though the night was cool. Again a patrol passed our position, but didn't return. I leaned over to Sidorov and whispered in his ear, "Probably our guys have taken them. Our commander should be coming up soon." Indeed, several seconds later Kruglov materialized next to us and ordered, "Sneak up on the van." Lying there, I gave Sidorov a quick embrace. Perhaps, I thought, we're seeing each other for the last time. It was past 1 o'clock in the morning. Other than the sentries, there was no one else around the van. As we were creeping towards the target, a small car drove up to the van and stopped. The driver switched off the engine and 2 men stepped out of it. One was tall, the other was pudgy. They lit cigarettes and walked leisurely past the van towards a large armoured vehicle parked to the right of it. "Officers," Sidorov whispered to me, "these are the ones we need to take. See the folders under their arms?" With the appearance of the officers, the sentries snapped to attention. The tall Nazi opened the door of the vehicle and courteously allowed the pudgy one to enter in front of him. A bright rectangle of light cut through the darkness and fell on a tree, behind which I could see Kruglov, tightly pressed against the trunk. Vladimirov was beside him, holding a submachine gun at the ready. Just as the pudgy officer was about to climb into the vehicle, a burst of automatic weapons fire shattered the silence. I watched as the plump officer and the lanky Nazi both collapsed to the ground, dropping their folders. At the same instant there were the abrupt explosions of grenades and submachine gun fire. The German sentries were immediately killed, the small car exploded, and the van began to emit smoke. I heard the voice of Kruglov, "Fall back!" We hadn't even had time to make 100 meters when light machine guns and submachine guns opened up behind us. Bullets whistled over our heads. We dropped to the earth and began to look around. The Germans had quickly overcome their initial confusion. After the initial fusillade, they ceased their wild firing and became quiet. Probably noticing the tracks we had left in the dew-covered grass, they resumed firing and set out in pursuit of us. Crawling was now pointless. We leaped to our feet and started running for the forest. There, Vladimirov met us. He was holding thick folders and 2 map cases. On the forest path, along which we were retreating, Private Ushakov stopped us and reported to Senior Lieutenant Kruglov, "Comrade Commander, you can't take this path any further." "Why?" "Germans are in the woods. At first they were shouting like cattle drivers on a roundup, but now they've fallen silent. They want to block our passage through the swamp." Once again, we had evidence that our foe was not stupid. Kruglov studied us and then gave Sidorov a friendly clap on the shoulder. "Well, I don't think the fascists can block the entire swamp. We'll get through." Sidorov spat on his hands and wiped them. "We'll break through, Comrade Commander, and we'll deliver the folders with the papers on time." Hurrying through the forest undergrowth, we kept running into dry brush, scratching our faces and hands until they were bloody. Having separated from our pursuers, we entered a patch of dense, tall reeds. The ground began to move beneath our feet like bread dough. Struggling step by step, our feet sinking in the wet bog, we moved deeper and deeper into the tangled vegetation. We beat the Germans by only a few minutes. We hadn't even managed to get 300 meters through the swamp when we could hear German voices and the yipping of dogs behind us. But fortunately, further on, the swamp was dry. This allowed us to separate from our pursuers quickly. Sidorov, catching up with the Red Army man we had earlier taken prisoner, who was taking a gun sight to his wife as a gift, said, "You, brother, forgive us. It was dark, and we couldn't make out who you were." The soldier replied, "You treated me well. Don't say a word about it. Now my ears are ringing, but on the other hand, I'm home." The rays of the rising sun were glinting off the stalks of ripened wheat. The rye stalks were drooping under their heavy burden of grain. I was lying in a foxhole, looking at the waving field of grain and thinking, where is that fellow now, who ploughed this field and then scattered the seed on the fragrant, freshly turned soil? Perhaps he too is now gazing from a foxhole on a field of grain and yearning for peaceful labour. Volodya Sidorov was lying beside me. He was a sharp-witted man with a good memory. He could more quickly and accurately evaluate a complex combat situation than anyone. He always knew how to pick the best position in combat. His small, clever eyes were always smiling on his simple, snub-nosed face. When speaking with a comrade, he loved to clap him on the back. His entire character showed in the sweeping and confident movements of a sniper. Even now, we had dug our position close to the highway at his insistence. Things had been quiet for 2 days. We were already thinking that the enemy's advance had at last been stopped. But now, on the morning of 7 September, an enemy shell exploded in our battalion's sector. It signalled the start of savage fighting for the city of Ropshar. With each minute, the artillery fire intensified. Hundreds of guns on both sides were taking part in it. The air was filled with the thunder of explosions and the screech of metal. Fires were burning furiously all around. As always during an artillery barrage, a continuous roar filled your head, and your face and hands gradually became blackened with soot. A terrible thirst would develop. It seemed that a single swallow of water would immediately soothe you and reinvigorate you. This agonizing condition would last until you saw the first helmet of an enemy soldier. As soon as this helmet with its distinctive protective skirt appeared, you immediately forgot about everything else. Thirst, fatigue, the noise in your head. You became overwhelmed with one desire, to kill the fascist. You saw a foe, and you rejoiced at his death. With our faces pressed into the sandy soil, my partner Sidorov and I occasionally exchanged glances. How it happened, I never noticed. But when I took another glance at Volodya, he was sprawled on his side, his face covered with blood. I pressed my ear to his chest. He was dead. Just a minute before, Sidorov had told me, "Breathe evenly and don't open your mouth so widely. Don't let your heart pound or else you'll spoil your aim." Volodya, giving me a wink, had added, "Soon it will be our turn to shoot." He had noticed that my mouth was wide open, as I was gasping for air from the nearly suffocating smoke of the explosives. Sidorov, smiling, looked away and continued to keep watch over the road. All this had happened just a minute before, and now he was lying there with a bloody face, his skull split open by a large shell fragment. I didn't want to believe that Vladimir was dead. Over and over again, I pressed my ear against his chest with the hope of catching at least a muffled heartbeat. But the sniper's heart had stopped. He was dead, still tightly clutching his rifle. I lay next to my dead friend, full of resolve to guard his body to my last cartridge. As soon as the artillery firing ceased, Major Chistyakov's order followed. "Fall back to the ravine." I picked up Vladimir's body and placed it on my back, taking one more glance at a grain stalk next to our foxhole, which by some miracle had survived the storm of fire. The head, dusted with soot, continued to rock on its slender stalk. Such a life force is in it, I thought to myself. I began to crawl back to the ravine. It was difficult to crawl across the torn-up field with my comrade's body, but I couldn't leave it behind. In the ravine, one of our artillerymen ran up to me and asked despairingly, "You're retreating again?" "No, we're not retreating. We're taking up new positions." I took my spade out of its case and began to dig a grave. "Is that your commander?" the artilleryman inquired. "No, not the commander, a friend." Bodrov and Ulyanov came up to me. Together we silently buried our comrade sniper, the communist Vladimir Andreevich Sidorov. The enemy command, despite enormous losses, continued to throw fresh units into the battle, trying to break through to Ropshar. Enemy tanks materialized out of some dense bushes. They started to advance on us at full speed. The German vehicles didn't manage to advance even 300 meters, however, before Captain Stolyarov's battery knocked out a first, then a second tank. Deafening explosions rang out. The shells inside the knocked-out tanks were exploding. Infantry began to leap from the tanks and to take cover in the bushes. 3 more enemy tanks stopped and burst into flames. The remaining 13 tanks took cover in a ravine, sheltered from the direct fire of Stolyarov's battery. The Major's order was passed from mouth to mouth along the foxholes. "Prepare grenades." We quickly bundled several grenades together and tied bottles containing flammable liquid to them. However, none of us really knew how we were going to approach the enemy tanks. Plainly, before we could creep close enough to the tanks to hurl our grenade bundles, the Germans would shoot us down from machine guns. Just then, as if to spite us, German infantry began to emerge from the bushes, striving to link up with their tanks. Major Chistyakov was standing in a foxhole not far from us. His face was pale, and there were beads of sweat on his forehead. He was nervously chewing his lips, never once taking his eyes off of the German infantry. Company commanders Zorin, Vorobev and Kruglov were standing together with the battalion commander. Vorobev looked directly into the Major's eyes. "How will it be, comrade commander? Are we really going to let these bastards break our line?" "Just what can you advise?" Heavy silence settled over the little group. I knew that Lieutenant Vorobyev would unhesitatingly die before retreating. In this situation, though, this sacrifice would have been senseless. At least a battalion of German infantry had assembled in the ravine, which at any moment might attack us under the cover of their tanks' supporting fire. However, Vorobyev grew increasingly heated and tried to convince the battalion commander that it was better to die in battle than to remain in the foxhole, waiting for the Germans to shoot you down or grind you to pieces. Kruglov grew impatient with Vorobyev's persistent arguments and swore loudly, then said, "Calm down, Lieutenant. We need to give this matter a good thinking. Possibly we'll find a way out." Vorobev shot Kruglov a hostile glance. "There's only one way out, Comrade Senior Lieutenant. Attack and sell our lives as dearly as possible." Major Chistyakov gave Vorobev a friendly clap on the shoulder. "It's a bit too early, friend, to think of dying. We need to know how to fight. We know what war is, but there's no point in spilling our own blood for nothing. To hurl ourselves headlong straight into the barrels of enemy guns and machine guns, that isn't heroism. That's cowardice in the face of enemy strength." The Major raised his binoculars to his eyes and carefully examined the slopes of the ravine, which were overgrown with small bushes. Then he continued his interrupted statement. "You, Comrade Lieutenant, are a commander, and you are proposing not only risking your own life, but also the lives of your men. The motherland has made you responsible for their well-being. Always remember this, or else you will lose that which is most dear, your soldiers' trust." German motorcyclists, evidently couriers, emerged from the bushes and drove up to the ravine. One of the motorcyclists passed some order to the infantry, and then the motorcycles quickly sped away. At this moment, a hatch on one of the German tanks opened. From out of the grey armoured turret a tanker's head appeared. An infantry officer ran up to him. From our side a single rifle shot rang out, and the tanker, clutching his head with his hands, slowly sank back into the turret. The hatch closed. Soon the tank's engines began to roar, and they began to climb the shallow slope of the ravine. Borisov, my new partner after Sidorov's death, whispered through his tightly compressed lips as he gripped the handle of an anti-tank grenade. "They're coming. Well and good. We'll meet them." In front of us now were German tanks and infantry. Behind us, a quagmire. Enemy bombers appeared overhead, but not a single trooper moved from his place. Each one hugged his native soil more tightly. Everyone waited for a signal. But Battalion Commander Chistyakov continued to stand calmly in his foxhole. What's he waiting for? Why is he silent? I thought. Then suddenly something happened that was completely unexpected for us all. The tanks turned around and the enemy infantry showed their backs to us. The firing of light machine guns from beyond the ravine carried to our ears. It was like a miracle. In actuality, as later became clear, a company of sub-machine gunners from the regiment reserve, which had been attached to our battalion, had at Major Chistyakov's order cheekily outflanked the enemy's position. As soon as our company had reached the designated place and assaulted the Germans from behind, we attacked the adversary from in front. Bundles of hand grenades and Molotov cocktails flew at the tanks as heavy and light machine guns opened fire. The foe, pressed by our fire to the bottom of the ravine, thrashed like a wounded beast. 3 tanks burst into flames, and the remainder began to retreat hastily in the direction of the forest. Now once again Captain Stolyarov's battery joined the battle. The captain was now standing at full height in his foxhole and shouting into his telephone in his thundering voice, "Fire! Damn it! Rapid fire!" The enemy infantry, deprived of their tank support, began to abandon the ravine and flee, but few made it out alive. When the danger of the enemy attack had passed, Captain Stolyarov ran up to Chistyakov and firmly embraced him. After the battle, the battalion commander stood above a narrow trench and with unconcealed pride watched his Red Army troops pass below him. The machine gunner Yershov was among them. Company Commander Kruglov stopped the soldier. "Well, old boy, well done, but you're probably tired after dragging that Maxim from place to place today." Yershov, smiling, patted the jacket of the machine gun. "What are you saying, Comrade Commander? I'm not at all tired. This is a light burden. It is much harder when the enemy is pressing you and you don't have any way to stop him. But this friend won't let you down. Tuck, tuck, tuck. And it's as if the fascists were never there." In the evening, when all was quiet and the day's duties were done, the soldiers gathered in Platoon Commander Vladimirov's spacious bunker. They felt like having some fun, to spend time with their comrades, and to forget about what they had experienced that day, if at least for a short while. As always, the Russian guitar and accordion cheered us up and delighted us. The cook Katayev carefully kept these instruments in a case with his field kitchen. The platoon favourite, Private Vladimir Smirnov, could play the accordion like a master, while the sniper Sinitsyn was a superb guitarist. Our musicians comfortably settled on plank beds and began to play at once. "Rise up, enormous country, rise up for the life and death struggle." We deeply loved this song not only for its fine lyrics, but also for its stirring melody. All Soviet people sang it in those years, wherever they might be located. They sang it in the rear and at the front. Soldiers sang it before a battle, and workers sang it at their workstations. Let the noble fury well up like a wave, a national war, a sacred war is going on. A lively Russian dance followed this song. The Siberian Alesha Ulyanov, slowly, as if unwillingly, entered the circle of men. A lock of hair fell down over his forehead, and with a toss of his head he flipped it back and immediately began a lively jig. Ulyanov's dance was infectious. The watching soldiers began to tap their feet. From out of the crowd, Zina Stroyeva stepped into the circle. Her khaki-colored jacket was torn and scorched, but a clean, colorful kerchief was neatly covering her head. Stroyeva had a beautiful Russian face, tanned by the summer sun, with rosy cheeks. Her large blue eyes looked at us provocatively. Thick curls of chestnut-coloured hair fell around her shoulders. A belt tightly encircled her slender, maidenly waistline. My, she looked like a treat at this minute. How sweet was her wide, mischievous smile, and how she could dance. Her untrained feet were now tapping out a rhythm, now lightly and beautifully moving across the damp dirt floor on her tiptoes. Many of the soldiers and officers had an eye for Zina, but she always spurned their advances. Such strictness in the young woman's behaviour under front-line conditions seemed strange and surprising to many. "Come on, dear fellow, don't rush to declare your love," Stroyeva would typically cut off a hapless admirer. "But show me in battle what a hero you are." She would say this calmly, while at the same time fixing you with a gaze that would leave you tongue-tied. Gazing at Xena and my dancing comrades, I thought to myself, here it is, the simple soldier's merriment amidst so much death. At that moment I recalled Stroyeva's entire life story, which she had once briefly told me. Xena's father, Vasily Alexandrovich, and mother Maria Sergeyevna had been killed in a train wreck in 1922. Her aunt took in the little 2-year-old girl to raise, and she lived with her aunt until the age of 8. In 1928, the aunt passed away. The orphaned Xena was sent to an orphanage. Having successfully completed middle school, Xena enrolled in the Gertsen Pedagogical Institute in Leningrad. When the war broke out, the 4th-year student of the institute and Komsomol member Zinaida Stroyeva went to see the commissar of the district military enlistment office with an application in her hand. She requested that he accept her into the ranks of the Red Army. To all of the commissar's arguments that she withdraw the petition, Stroyeva firmly responded, "I'm a sniper, here's the document. I cannot remain on the sidelines." In the end, her request was granted. Xena first entered battle in the area of Volosovo Station as a member of our battalion. She endured all the hardships of frontline life together with us without complaint. Stroyeva had mastered the sniper's craft. She had distinguished herself as well in the fighting that day. It was Xena who had struck the tanker with a well-aimed shot. At the height of our merriment, Major Chistyakov and Senior Lieutenant Kruglov entered the bunker. Our musicians began to play the tune Barinya with enthusiasm. Major Chistyakov happily looked around at the faces of the Red Army soldiers, lit up by the dancing, and broadly smiled. "Comrade Major, step into the circle. Honour us with your presence," the voices rang out. "I'm a bad dancer, but with such music I'm ready to give it another try. Well then, step aside, fellows." The battalion commander gradually made his way through the circle of men, and then crossing his arms across his chest, he dropped into a squat. Chistyakov, of course, had put one over on us when he had excused himself for his dancing. He was a superb dancer. We awarded him with loud applause and shouts of "Bravo!" Kruglov also joined Chistyakov in the dance, but the fun was interrupted when Platoon Commander Petrov came running into the bunker. "Comrade Battalion Commander, the Germans are launching flares over no man's land." "Ah, flares again. Well, that means we must anticipate some trick or another. Put an end to the frolicking, comrades," Chistyakov quickly said. Without having time to thank the musicians and dancers, we hurried out of the bunker and took up our firing positions. We were expecting a night attack. Our snipers amused themselves while we waited by shooting at the flares dangling from their parachutes from captured rifles and explosive bullets. When such a bullet struck the flare or the parachute, it would explode, and the flare would drop to the earth, where it would still continue to burn. We spent the night exchanging fire with the Germans, but no night attack came. The rays of the rising sun illuminated the narrow trench in which the still-standing men had spent an anxious night preparing for battle. To the left of our position extended a swamp, from which a thick morning mist was rising. The tops of alders fancifully rose out of the milky shroud. The fog thickened with every minute. Soon it had enveloped the trench and the entire no-man's land. Nothing was visible at 5 paces. Encountering such a situation for the first time, many of us were at a loss. We stood anxiously in the trench with our weapons, not knowing what to do. Unexpectedly, Battalion Commander Chistyakov emerged from the fog. "Comrades, keep alert. Where's the Senior Lieutenant?" Platoon Commander Petrov replied, "Senior Lieutenant Kruglov is checking the listening posts." Chistyakov glared at Petrov as if in reproach. "Why did Kruglov go out, and not you?" Then the major walked over to a heavy machine gun and pulled the trigger, firing a long burst. All the enemy's firing positions immediately responded to the sound of the machine gun. "Aha, they're hunkered down, the scum, fearing our attack." The major energetically shrugged his shoulders. We literally came alive, and our anxieties evaporated. From the direction of the ravine, from which we had driven the Germans the day before. Single rifle shots sounded. We perked up our ears. After the single rifle shots, there were bursts of automatic weapons fire, and at this instant a long howl rose from the ravine, like a human voice in the last moments of life. It was drowned out by the chatter of automatic weapons. What had happened in the ravine? Perhaps comrades were dying. We didn't know. Platoon Commander Petrov forbade us to go out and check what had happened. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the fog finally lifted and dissipated. The machine gun firing stopped. Together with the battalion commander and Petrov, I went to the company command post. There we found Kruglov, Stroyeva, Ulyanov and Bodrov having breakfast. There was also a lanky German officer sitting on a cartridge box in the corner of the bunker, eating some buckwheat kasha slowly and with dignity. The German was holding the mess tin between his knees and checking his watch from time to time. Chistyakov asked Kruglov, "Did you capture him in the ravine? Likely, he was scouting our positions." "Yes, he was scouting," the senior lieutenant responded. "He didn't expect to run into us." Politruk Vasilev stepped into the dugout. He had just returned from Leningrad. We surrounded him, vying with each other to question him. "I dropped all your letters into a postbox," he said. "Excuse me, but I couldn't drop in on your families. I was busy with duties." Then he continued, "Leningraders are preparing for the decisive battle. Their lives are hard. They're digging anti-tank ditches on the outskirts of the city, building pillboxes and emplacements, erecting iron barriers on the streets and mining approaches to the city." Complete silence fell over the bunker. Even the captured German had listened tensely to Vasilev's words. The political officer opened a pack of Belomorkanal cigarettes, and we all lit one up. The prisoner avidly sniffed the cigarette smoke. Vasilev resumed speaking. "Yes, the city is at full alarm. The connection between Leningrad and Moscow has been severed. There you have it." This announcement by the Politruk struck a deeply painful chord in our hearts. The Politruk searched me out with his eyes and handed me something heavy, wrapped in tent canvas. "Here, Yosif, a gift from our factory comrades. It was made in our factory." I opened the gift from our own factory and couldn't believe my eyes. Before the war, our factory had produced only civilian items of various types, but now 2 new polished submachine guns were lying in front of me. "They're for you and me. They ask that we try them out in battle and report on the results." The submachine guns provoked the fervent interest of all those around us. They passed from hand to hand. During our conversation with Vasilev, the German had been fidgeting on the empty case like a magpie on a perch, repeatedly glancing at his watch. Kruglov suddenly walked over to him and asked through an interpreter, "So you maintain that the attack will begin at 10 o'clock?" The German officer, gazing at the Soviet officer with fixed, empty eyes, dryly replied, "That was the order." Major Chistyakov checked his watch. "Well then, comrades, we'll check what he's saying, that the attack will begin at 10 o'clock. As for Leningrad—" With those words, the major shook his fist at the prisoner. We stepped out into the trench. Soon we heard the throbbing hum of enemy planes overhead. Squadron after squadron was flying towards Ropshar to bomb it. Our anti-aircraft artillery was firing non-stop. The prisoner was led away to regiment headquarters.